We have the pleasure of welcoming Peter Cook today to our interview series Leaders Hum. I'm Sumita Mariam from the peopleHum team. Before we begin, just a quick introduction of peopleHum. peopleHum is an end-to-end, one-view integrated human capital management automation platform, the winner of the 2019 Global Cody Award for HCM that is specifically built for crafted employee experiences and the future of work. We run the peopleHum blog and video channel, which receives upwards of 200,000 visitors a year, and publish around 2 interviews with well-known names globally every month. And now for our guest. Peter Cook is a keynote speaker, conference facilitator, event host, and the CEO of the Academy of Rock, where he delivers unique keynotes and masterclasses around the world, blending business intelligence with parallel lessons from music. He also helps with businesses and organizational development and mentoring for entrepreneurs, leaders, and professionals. A talented musician who linked all his passions for a greater cause, we are happy to have Peter on our interview series. Welcome, Peter. We're thrilled to have you.
Thank you so much, Sumitra. I mean, a very professional organisation you're running there, actually. So thank you.
Yes, Peter. Thank you so much. So, Peter, going to our first question. You've had a very interesting work experience. I mean, your work for the last 2 decades is quite interesting. So, can you tell us a little bit about your secret recipe, for linking music to business?
Well, it starts at birth, but we'll move 5 years forward. It was a difficult birth. My mother was 45, my dad was 67, and my mother told me I was a virgin birth, a fact which I used to try some Richard Branson some 50 odd years later. They're, of course, sadly gone now, but even then, my dad was still helping me many, many years after. But when I was 5, I wanted to be in the Beatles, but unfortunately, all the jobs were taken. I couldn't even get a job as the drummer. And I had a guitar at 5. But by the time I got to the age of 10, I wanted to be a scientist. When I went to the secondary school, I was fascinated with 3 things. I was fascinated with science, music, and then by the time I got to 30, I was fascinated with business and management when I worked in so I left school, didn't go to university actually at that time. The norm for a grammar school would be to roll straight off and go to university. But because my parents were very old, I felt the need to sort of earn a living and sort of help with the family. So, because they were quite old by that time. So I went and got a job at a pharmaceutical company, and I had the lucky break of being sort of reasonably talented at chemistry and pharmaceuticals, and so I worked on the first human insulin product and the first product for HIV/AIDS. So my early career was amazingly wonderful in terms of working with scientists. And I had the great privilege also of working around the world at that time, working particularly in India for many months actually, all around India, sort of fixing the factory that we had there and looking at contractors. And that actually gave me another element, I think, of a unique sort of privilege, which was seeing other people's worlds. I think you can learn at universities and study and learn brilliantly now with the internet, but the University of Life is a much better teacher in terms of experience. So at the age of 34, I left corporate life. I had also become a university lecturer through studying management. I thought it was so interesting that I wanted to sort of do that as well. So I had science, business and music. And for the last 25 years, I've systematically fused those together. It's taken a long time to do. But I came to realise that it's not such a weird combination because, let's face it, music is applied physics. That's all it is. I may demonstrate later on about that. But so science and music are not poles apart. Science and the arts are not poles apart. We think of them like that because most times at school, we're told that we're either arty or mathematical or scientific. And the two are sort of taken apart at school to be treated separately. But in fact, they unify. Even Einstein was known to have thought that had he not been a physicist, he'd have preferred to be a musician. So over those 20 odd years, I've sort of synthesized business, music and science really. And that's what I bring together, which is an unusual combination, but not so weird when you really take it apart.
Well, that's a wonderful journey. One door opening to another and keeping it all together and linking it. I love it. So I have another question for you. So we see a lot of professionals quitting their jobs to pursue their passion, which is art. So would you advise them to keep a fine balance of both or pursue one of them?
Oh, what a difficult question. I don't know any musicians apart from world-class musicians that are paid properly for their work. So I should really say, don't drop your business for your art. I had my music as a hobby, but I've managed to cheekily combine it. I must say that lots of people do start out with the dream for being an entrepreneur, and dreams are important. I started and decided to leave my work and started as a management consultant. The music came a little bit afterwards. But it isn't possible to fuse your hobby with what earns you money all the time. So I must sign a word of caution. I've worked really, it's taken 25 years to get this point, and people seem to think that somehow, like the X Factor, overnight you can do this. It takes real determination, actually. But if you must pursue your dreams, providing you execute your dreams practically in detail. I mean, it's not enough just to want to pursue your hobby. You have to work at it like any business. So the answer is yes, pursue your dreams, but do the perspiration rather than just the inspiration, because you will know that any balance between inspiration and perspiration is 1% inspiration and a lot of hard work. So do the hard work as well, and then probably you'll succeed, but I can't guarantee that.
Yeah, that's right. So a lot of people struggling with, not knowing what they want to do next. So coming to our next question, according to you, what would be an ideal workplace culture? What do you think organizations should go about while giving their employees the best experience?
Well, I've written a book on sort of HR cultures, or several books, in fact, on that. And we are in the fourth industrial age. It's not exactly that we've left farming and heavy industry behind, but we are now in the fourth industrial age where being able to convert data into information is just as important as being able to do physical things. And we need both of those skills. A good employee culture, and I'm working on several at the moment, is one that allows people to bring all of themselves to work. I don't mean their hobbies. I do mean, their brain, their passion, all of that. And there are several examples I would bring to bear on that. The company Virgin that I won the prize from Richard Branson is a really good example of what I would call purposeful capitalism, because Richard does encourage people to bring all of themselves to work. If they have something that they do specially, rather than hiding it and going home at 5 o'clock, he tries to design jobs so that you can use your passions. And it is the ideal. I think there are views that say that capitalism has gone beyond its design point, and companies now just sweat the labour out of people without caring for what they do. But that doesn't produce discretionary effort, and it doesn't produce superior performance. The great companies that actually get that superior performance allow people to, if they've got some passion, they find ways of allowing them to do what they're good at. I don't think it gets much more difficult than that. And companies that do that they're not new in real terms. I mean, I look back often to my own company, the Wellcome Foundation, which was a philanthropic pharmaceutical company. It sprung out of the need to do good things, and then the profits came, in the same way as Merck looked at that. I mean, pharmaceutical companies are variously viewed as mad, bad, and evil, but this was a company which actually donated most of the profits, or all of the profits, to a charity. So their purpose was to do great things around the world, and in spite of themselves, they made money and kept people wanting to be there for decades and for years. Now, we don't have that currently, that sort of long-term employment outlook, because the half-life of jobs is dropping really, really fast. But companies that do that kind of thing help people to learn and improve. And continuous professional development used to be a luxury when I used to run the Chartered Institute of Personnel Development here in the UK, or part of it. It's no longer a luxury. You have to learn, because the half-life of your skills are gone within a few years, sometimes shorter in IT. So good companies celebrate what people bring to the workplace. They also insist that people learn. It's not an option. and they encourage them to do their best work and design jobs. I think all of those old companies that we think of are like Quaker inspired companies like Pilkington and Cadbury's that built sort of villages for their people. That's, people say that's quaint and old fashioned. Actually doing things to give people their basic needs while inspiring them to do great things are the hallmarks of great cultures. And I'm privileged to work with a couple at the moment as well. So it's things around that actually I think are important.
Yeah, so I think, organizations are drifting a little bit from what they call themselves as employee centric. And I love your idea of designing jobs for them and celebrating what the employee brings to the organizations. That's wonderful. So, keeping all this in mind, how would you like to describe the concept of future of work? How do you think our current scenario, the scenario of the coronavirus, is going to change the workplace of the future that we imagined?
Well, I don't know that it will change it that much for some people. I've worked virtually for 25 years. This, in fact, is my office here, which I have. I do have some equipment, office equipment, but I have a lot of guitars in here as well, which I. But it is my laboratory for thinking and doing. And I don't think everyone has that space to sort of spread out. But nonetheless, I find that entrepreneurs, if they don't find a special place for themselves, even if it is a small space sort of in their house, they can't focus. I mean, I do know people that try to do it from their tabletop, and you need to find a sacred place. It doesn't have to be a laboratory. So I think individuals need to find comfort within their surroundings, and sometimes the home isn't the best place for that actually, so they may have to rent an office to do it. I have the luxury of having a basement here, which is where I sort of, my wife is very happy when I come down here because she knows that I'm working and or playing the guitar. But nonetheless, finding a sacred place and finding a place that has protection where you can focus, because some people at home feel that work isn't the thing they do. So individuals need to find that space. Workplace people need also to trust people when they can't see them, and that's a tremendous problem because we're very used to having management that watch people working. If they can't see them, if they're mistrustful, they think that perhaps they're not working. So there's a two-way street here that businesses need to be more trusting and, of course, more demanding that people, fit their own work style. But people also, individuals, need to work out a work style that works for them. For example, I work all hours, but I don't necessarily work 9 to 5. But I actually work many more hours than I would ever have done perhaps at work, but I choose those hours. And I have the luxury of doing that because my clients are placed all around the world and they phone me up in the middle of the night, but I prepare for that. And the trade-off for me is I love cycling. So I'll go out and cycle for 20 miles a day, if I have the chance to do that. So I take my breaks when I can, not because of the routine of work. And that doesn't suit everyone. I think we're also going to have to get very much better at working like this remotely. And I was an early adopter, and it looks like you are as well. And there's certain things we can do really well over the internet and certain things that we can't. I feel that I have working for a company at the moment that works in gold mining, and they still want me to turn up in their location and play the guitar from time to time to teach them things that are much easier to do when we're actually all together. So, for example, I sometimes get people to jam with me and sort of play music together, which we may sample later on in this. But we can do that with technology, but it isn't quite the same as the human interaction that takes place in a room. And I don't think I'd ever wish to have replaced my trips to India with a virtual trip. I could look it all up on the internet, but some of the things that I've experienced and seen are truly amazing. At the same time, we have to get much better at our global accountability for flying and doing that more responsibly and what have you. But I think there's a lot to be done in the world, and I hope we don't simply repeat the mistakes that got us here.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very important. In fact, like most of the employees are finding their couches really comfortable to work in. Kitchen counters are the perfect office spaces for people. So that that is a point. It really. So my next question for you would be: so this is a unique situation, and the leaders around the world, they are not used to this. So they were in an office, they were in a room with their team, and they were controlling them, managing them, looking after them. So right now they have like 10 different people in 10 different cities or 10 different houses. So how would you advise the leaders of today who are not trained to manage a remote team? What would you advise them to do differently?
Well, I'm going to lean on some of the experience from one of my books. I've written 12 books on business, and some of them are very serious. This is perhaps one of the less serious ones. It's called The Music of Business. And inside there, and I can send you the graphic if it helps to have this, I could screen share it if you wanted. I talk about the idea of orchestras, jazz groups, and rock groups, or pop music, perhaps is a better way of describing it. Leaders have to behave much more less like orchestra conductors and rather more trusting and passing leadership around. Now, an orchestra, it has a division of labour like a sort of factory. There are 7 sections or 5 sections of the orchestra: the trumpet section and the string section and so on. And the orchestra conductor has all the sheet music, and so do the workers, and he or she has just simply to direct people to do certain things, and they all have the instructions in front of them. But the modern workplace isn't like that, because you want people to be creative and to see what's going on with their customers, and sometimes they have to go off the sheet music to improvise with their customers to deliver fantastic benefits. So the orchestra model has never been very good for the last 20 or so years, and people are still clinging on to command and control. It works if you're all doing the same thing all the time, but of course the opposite is, or the other extreme of this is jazz, where everyone's improvising all the time and there's no conductor, and a bad jazz group just improvises away from each other and the music is terrible. So you don't want free improvisation. If you think about how certain improvisations work, and I can demonstrate this with sort of raga type music, there is a thematic chord or mode to most Indian raga music within which there's room for the players to improvise. And pop music also, or a rock group, is like that. You're going to have 3 verses and a chorus, and you'll repeat certain elements. So we know that there's structure, but within that there's room for people to bring themselves to it. So I would advise business leaders to get a little more about pop music or raga. Would you like a demonstration?
We would like to have it, yes.
I don't have tablas or anything, or I haven't got a band here, but I'm going to sort of create the semblance of the kind of music we're talking about. If I just sort of set this up, I haven't quite prepared this, but so most raga music, for the non-musically educated, you don't have to have a music degree to understand this. It works on what people often describe as a drone, a single note. So that might be played on the sitar. In this case, I'm going to play it on a guitar. So can you hear that? And so I'm going to set up something so I can improvise over it. So I have to use some trickery and some technology. So I'm going to record a piece of this guitar, and then I'll set something up. So this will be like the drone. Right, we've got that established. Now, in pop music, you have 3-part harmony, but in raga, you use very different scales that sort of conjure up the notion of Indian music. So things like this. I don't know how good that sounds over Zoom. Sometimes computer microphones are a bit rubbish, but anyway.
It sounded good.
Okay. Just my speakers rather than a direct line in. But do you see what I mean? You know, that you can sort of, so improvisation, you know, is not random either. So there are sort of notes that one uses. So it would sound a lot better if it was on a sitar, of course, but there we go. It's the best I can do on a Monday morning. So yes, back to the point. Leaders need to learn to trust people working away from the thing. They need to learn how to work with diversity where they can't actually get people in a room, and they need to learn about how to improvise with teams. It's even harder than in music because you're not in the same room, but there are skills that can be learned, and I think we're all having to do that now. So yeah, there we are.
That's nice. And I really loved the demonstration. Now I really understand how link everything together. That's wonderful. So, um, coming to my next question. So we have a rising millennial workforce right now. The millennials and the Gen Z workforce are on the rise. So with them, the gig economy is also rising. People work as contract workers for all sorts of jobs. It's not just delivery boys anymore. It's more like video editors and sales professionals. Everyone wants their gig. So how do you think this is going to fit in the organizational setup that we already have?
Well, organisations can do two things with gig economy workers. They can exploit them, pay them poor wages, and see them walk away and find better employment eventually, or they can treat them properly like employees. Clearly, it's different around the world because gig economy workers almost universally don't have unions. I'm not a great fan of unions anyway, but they have no collective power. And governments and organisations that do the right thing see well by their employees, and they get that superior performance from them. In the world of music, the whole idea of the gig economy actually does come from the world of music. And there's a sort of famous joke in this country about musicians. You know, these are people that drive 500 miles to go and play somewhere, and that when they get there, the person running the gig says, "Oh, he forgot to advertise it, and so would they mind if they didn't get paid?" Because the owner of the venue knows that they will go away, and there's another 500 people who are willing to do that trip. And musicians are particularly good at taking all their equipment 500 miles to get nothing and then returning. I mean, that's unprofessional musicians. Clearly, it's not the same at the top of the music business. Hence, that gig economy story springs from that sort of idea of going to do a gig and finding that you were poorly treated. And you go home and you probably, if you're clever, you'd learn not to do that again. But so many people actually are exploited by modern employment conditions. And it is a choice for leaders in business to make sure that gig economy workers are properly rewarded for what they do and recognised. Recognition is good. You know, a pat on the back is great, but actually making sure and what employers can do, as well as if they're choosing to use them for certain things, and perhaps that their wage doesn't contribute their entire income because they've got several gigs, what employers can really do alongside paying them reasonable wages for their work is then to make sure that their next gig is easier to find, to recommend them, and make sure to make them famous, so to speak. I don't mean famous in fame terms, but actually they can do things that help you to sustain this up and down, topsy-turvy way of working. If you make sure that your gig economies workers are continuously employable, then perhaps they don't rely on you so much, and perhaps then that you feel less guilty about only being able to give them one day of work a week and things like that. So there are things that employers can do on the sort of non-reward side to make sure that gig economy workers can do that. At the same time, gig economy workers must learn not to, take the job on the basis that it might make them famous. Because in the world of music, the standard joke is to do this gig for nothing, but you might get famous. Managers in the music business are not always, people to look up at, because they do exploit people and say that it'll be good for you. It isn't always good for people. So we must be balanced about that. So there's responsibilities on both the employee side and the employer, and the best companies know how to manage temporary workers, interims, gig economies, freelancers. They do that better than the rest.
That's wonderful. I really love the example. It's like we have the etymology of gig economy right there. So, I have another question for you regarding the same thing. So, what connection between music and the millennials, or say the Gen Z, would you use to enable leaders, managing this particular generation of workforce?
Well, if we assume that the gig economy, if we assume that millennials are somehow genetically different, with my science gene tells me that's not true. It would be amazing if genetically we had evolved in 20 years. But what has happened in the last 20 or 30 years is the experience of work has changed. So millennials now, as I said before, their sort of half-life of their skills declines quickly. Therefore, they can't stay in a job for life. They have to continuously learn. The nature of work changes continuously, and they have learnt to be kind of grasshoppers in terms of jobs and skills. That makes it really hard. You have to be someone that's comfortable with what I would call a portfolio existence. If you opened up the average millennial's iPhone or phone, you would find a plethora of music from all different genres. When I grew up, you either liked rock or you liked reggae or but the music that people have on their iPhones is actually quite diverse. And people's interests, now they can see into other worlds, is quite diverse. Now the employer wants the person to do a particular job and not keep free ranging across different platforms, but the millennial actually has many different interests, so they have to somehow harness those interests and sort of funnel them into the thing that they want them to do called work. They have also to have on their agenda, perhaps every 6 months or year, the conversation, not the appraisal conversation, but what do you want to do next? What really gets you out of bed in the morning, and what keeps you getting out of bed to come here? I think they're really good questions. And if then the employer can say, well, I think a spell in marketing would be good for you because I see that you do this in your spare time. It's just discovering why people come to work is one of the key success ingredients, and more particularly why they keep coming to work, and also what would stop them coming to work. What work do they really hate doing? Now, you can't eliminate those things that people have to do, the kind of grunt work of work. We all have to do some of that. I do my accounts, for example, because I like making sure that things are straight, but nonetheless, I needn't do that. But we have to kind of make a deal with the employee. There are some parts of their work that they are valuable, but they're not interesting. We all have to take a little bit of that work that we're bored with, but we must find the things that keep people coming to work and stop them migrating to another firm, I think is probably there. And it's finding that requisite diversity without losing the focus of what the organisation wants to do. I mean, most organisations are set up as machines to do certain things, and that doesn't always play well with the passions and interests of employees. It is having that conversation. I think that's uniquely a human thing, and you can't find it out by you perhaps could find out by downloading the contents of your employee's iPhone, but nonetheless we have to find out in a deeply human way what it is that keeps them coming to work, getting out of bed and not staying at home. That's all there is.
Oh, that's wonderful. I think, if they really want to do it, are they really passionate? Is the 15 to 16 hours of work they're doing is out of passion, or is it for something else? I think it's really important for organizations to really understand what's I don't know, like what's the passion? What is really behind them coming to work every day?
And
So
do you know that companies, one of the great, I do a talk on learning from Virgin and Richard Branson's group of companies. And what's unusual about Virgin, it starts at the very first day. You know, there's that old phrase that people say you get hired for your skills and knowledge and sacked for your attitude. Whereas Virgin hire you for your attitude, and if you need to learn knowledge and skills, they're freely available on the internet to learn. You know, so it's the reversal of that process, because Richard Branson, as a dyslexic, I think he found that he couldn't always do all the detail of all the people he was hiring. So he places a lot of emphasis on establishing trust with people at the very first moment. So you'll find that Virgin invest an inordinate amount of time in what we call hiring or recruitment, and rather less time on training and development. So they invest time getting the right people rather than trying to fix the wrong people. And it is that very first question, and building what we call in academia the psychological contract, and understanding that that will change quite frequently. It needs to be on review. And I don't mean appraisal. I mean, you know, what's your next big step to do wonderful things and help our company succeed? It's that ongoing conversation that needs to happen. And it starts right at the beginning before anyone has even applied for a job. You can't do that easily on the internet when CVs are like they're all the same. You need to really find out what the person brings and why they would come, why they would stay, and what they would do.
that makes a lot of sense. The first step, if it's 100% perfect, then everything just follows, and recruitment is a 24/7 process. It never stops. So that makes a lot of sense. And coming to my final question, Peter, if there are any, last important sound bites that you would like to leave our viewers.
Well, since we're talking about, we ought to have one from business, one from science, and one from music. I'm a great fan of Prince, of which this is his symbol. And, he points out what the Beatles understood many, many years before. He said, money don't buy you happiness, but it's shown enough to pay for the research. So happiness at work doesn't necessarily arise from being paid more. It's certainly the lack of happiness may well arise from not being paid enough, which is what Hertzberg called dissatisfier. But pay is a dissatisfier. It's, doubling people's pay doesn't make them work twice as hard, or certainly not for very long anyway. It does promote them asking for another pay rise. But, money's simply a thing we need to manage hygiene factors like getting food and shelter. We need to find better things to do to make us happy. And I think the research demonstrates that all the great things that we've had across the world over many, many years seems to not have made people happier, and particularly in the Western world. And we've lost hold of things which people hold dear, which are not sort of easy to put on spreadsheets. So that's learning from Prince. If I would turn to business, perhaps, I think that Charles Handy, Professor Charles Handy, kindly gave me a credit on one of the books that I wrote. He said some very wise things about organisations. He said, creativity may seem messy, it's not efficient. Well, it may not be efficient, but it may be very effective. The difference between efficiency is, finessing your work so it seems very tidy, and managers like to do that. But effectiveness is doing the right things, which leaders like to do. And we need leadership and management to do things which are both effective and efficient. And finally, from the world of science, I'm going to return to Einstein. Simplicity in a complex world matters, because Einstein was reputed to only ever use one bar of soap for washing and shaving. Why would you need two sorts? And of course, we proliferated all these brands. You have to have one bar, one thing for shaving, one thing for washing, one thing for doing something else. In a complex world, and I'm doing some work with a company about this right at the moment, simplicity is really key, because otherwise you drown in that complexity. So in cleaning the world up, we need to look for simpler ways to do things, rather than the complex ways. They would be my three things.
That's wonderful, Peter. I had a wonderful time talking with you, and this has been a very enriching experience. And I'm very sure this is going to, enrich the knowledge of a lot of our viewers. And it was a unique experience listening to you play the guitar and explain to us, what it means to link all your music, your passion, and work.
Would you like me to play you out a little bit at the end?
Oh, we would love that.
I, I would just add to what you've said. This interview you've created is so professionally done. People do hook up on the internet and say, "What do you do?" I don't mind answering that question, but this is also another hallmark of success. When something looks easy, it's because someone has done the homework on it. I have a guy that sometimes does my decorating in the house, and whilst I can put wallpaper up, I'm able to do it. He will do a corner that's really complex in a way that I had never ever thought of. That's because he's done it millions of times over, and he's learned and improved. So I very much appreciate this conversation. And if you want, I'll give you 30 seconds of music towards the end. But do your end piece, if you will, or do it at the end, whichever you feel.
It's our pleasure to have you, Peter, and we're so happy we had this interview, we had this conversation. So I'm definitely going to keep in touch with you, and yeah, that's it.
So a little bit of music to finish.
Yes, please.
So we're turned away from raga to another simple form of music. Well, raga's not simple, but one that has a simple structure. The blues has three chords, and it's sort of, what's going to happen, and the singer says, "Woke up this morning," in Western thinking. So this is a sort of blues from Prince, actually. So. I think we're done.
Wow. That's wonderful. I'm sure our audience is going to love it. And thank you so much, Peter. Thank you for coming to our interview.
Thank you, Samit.